It doesn't believe in the truth. It doesn't believe in human life. It doesn't believe in any kind of individual freedom. It believes only in the increasing power of the state. And that's what we see with the ANC as it is in power today. All the signs were there before the organization came to power.
What are the ideological underpinnings of the ruling ANC government? I posed this question to John Kane-Berman, a senior policy fellow with the Institute of Race Relations and one-time CEO of the IRR. What follows is a short extract from a longer conversation on my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. If you enjoyed this analysis, you might want to check out the full interview with John Kane-Berman. That's linked in the description below. Enjoy. Okay, so a lot of those early warnings about the character of the ANC as a movement, I think, have been vindicated by the last 3 decades or so of the ANC in government. So the ANC takes power in the first democratic elections in 1994. What was the stance that the Institute took in relation to that new government?
In 1990, shortly after Mr. Mandela had been released, he made a speech, I think, from the balcony of the City Hall in Cape Town, which was televised live around the world. And I remember Pierre and I watched that on television when he promised or urged an intensification of violence. And our hearts sank, as did those of many people, because here was Mr. Mandela on the day or the day after his liberation, now talking about an intensification of violence. And that is exactly what happened. We, in 1994, as the build-up to the handover of power was taking place, warned that revolutions don't always result in liberal democratic outcomes. And we pointed to the USSR, where after 1917, oppression was much worse than it had ever been under the Tsars. The same was true after the French Revolution in 1789. And we said, well, South Africa needs to be on guard that this revolution that we are experiencing does not go awry. And of course, there were all the warning signs, the dishonesty of the ANC's campaign in blaming all the violence on the state when it knew perfectly well that the main cause of the violence was its own people's war and revolutionary strategies. The beginnings of dishonesty with the arms deal while Mr. Mandela was still president. All of these things that have come to pass subsequently, the seeds were all there. They were all there you could argue from the 1960s onwards, when the ANC turned to violence and shortly thereafter decided it was going to lift any prohibition on targeting civilians. It was supposedly going to only blow up pylons, but I remember, I think it was our chairman, Ernie Wenzel, who'd been a vice president of the Liberal Party at one stage.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
Had said, if you start with blowing up pylons, you will soon start blowing up people. And the ANC's attacks, assassinations in the People's War, its murder of civilians, and so on, we all saw these signs there, so we were not complacent when the organization assumed power in 1994 that South Africa was now going to have a happy liberal democratic outcome. We thought there were very, very good reasons to be apprehensive and to be on guard against this organization, given its history, given its ideological leanings, and given the strong influence of the Communist Party, which, in common with all communist parties around the world, is utterly ruthless. It doesn't believe in the truth. It doesn't believe in human life. It doesn't believe in any kind of individual freedom. It believes only in the increasing power of the state. And that's what we see with the ANC as it is in power today. All the signs were there before the organization came to power.
Yeah, and part of the hubris of the National Party regime was banning those liberation movements, sending them abroad into exile, into the awaiting arms of the Soviet Union. And during the Cold War, the Soviet Union was always on the lookout for allies as well. So supplied the ANC very generously with training, weapons, and kind of ideological cover as well. And 1969, I think, was a seminal year in the history of the ANC, the Morogoro Conference in Tanzania, where the ANC officially adopted the policy of the National Democratic Revolution, which is socialist and statist in character, as you've described. So I think people, I think, tend to underestimate the influence of socialist ideology on the ANC.
I have no doubt that they do. I remember being a guest speaker at a conference at the Johannesburg Country Club, organized by the F. de Klerk Foundation several years ago. The conference was on the National Democratic Revolution. And I talked about the influence of the Communist Party, because the National Democratic Revolution is a communist idea. And a very prominent businessman in the audience got up and accused me of seeing Reds under the bed. And I said to him, well, the Reds aren't under the bed, they're actually on top of the political heap. I think there's still a reluctance on the part of the business community and on the part of the South African media, not only the mainstream media, but also online media, various websites and so on. They don't want to recognize either the prominence of the South African Communist Party or the importance of the National Democratic Revolution. People talk about state capture, but the real capture that happened in this country, I think, was in 1960, when the ANC was effectively captured by the South African Communist Party and, of course, by Umkhonto we Sizwe.
Yeah, that narrative of capture, I think, is very convenient to deflect some of the criticism of the movement and its character, to say, well, no, there was this external force, this malevolent force that hijacked this otherwise benevolent movement.
Well, David, unfortunately, the National Party mismanaged the whole business from the start. If you think back to the Defiance campaign in the early 1950s, they introduced legislation to break the Defiance campaign, which started off as a peaceful defiance of unjust laws such as segregated railway stations and post offices. They introduced legislation which gave the state the power to order people to be flogged. There was then the bannings of the ANC and the Communist Party and the PAC and so on, the bannings of people, detention without trial, torture, listings of people so that they couldn't be quoted. The National Party, instead of trying to accommodate Black political aspirations, which were entirely legitimate, tried to crush them with ever more draconian security laws. And the Institute chronicled all of this in great detail and pointed out time and time again that all of these attempts to crush Black opposition to the apartheid system were futile. You couldn't do it. They didn't listen. They only started listening when, in a sense, it was too late, because these organizations, as you mentioned, the ANC had gone into exile. It couldn't operate lawfully within South Africa. So it went into the waiting arms of the South African Communist Party in Lusaka. And of course, the Russians had their own interest in the whole affair. And it was very significant that in 1976, after very large numbers of school children fled from Soweto and other black townships to neighboring states and eventually to the US and the UK, the only organization that had the structures to receive them, although they were all black consciousness supporters, followers of Steve Biko, but the only organization with the structures around the world to receive them was the ANC. And they wound up in training camps in the Soviet Union and came back with AK-47s to prosecute or to help the ANC prosecute the People's War. So the National Party was entirely short-sighted and stupid in the way it handled the growing opposition to its policies among black people, whether that opposition was violent or non-violent.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this discussion, you might want to check out the full conversation with John Kane-Berman. That's linked over here. And I'd also be grateful if you could subscribe to my other channel. That's linked over here. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.